Well, here's one of the more quoted and I think more misunderstood and perhaps misused Bible passages. Romans chapter 8, verse 28. We know that in all things God is working for the good of those who love him. Now that's truth, right? I mean, at least you want it to be true and you need it to be true. And since it's Bible, you figure, well, it has to be true. And it is. God's word is true, period. But that particular truth, we know that in all things, God is working for the good of those who love him. That's also stretching. And it's a little complicated. And it's not something that you can work through in a tweet or in an X or whatever they're calling it these days. I mean, first, notice that the verse does not say that everything is good. And you've probably lived long enough to know that and experience some not so good things in our lives that you have to deal with. Second, just quoting this verse to someone or to yourself doesn't make the bad things go away. And it doesn't make the person who's experiencing that not so good stuff feel better all of a sudden. Now, as we turn in the story of Jacob and his kids to Jacob's kids, we're going to see that. But by the time we get to the last scene, and that's going to take us several weeks to get to the last scene, but as by the time we get to that last scene, we're going to see in the life of Jacob and his kids that maybe it helps us understand this passage a little better and maybe even apply a little better the truth that verse is trying to get to our minds and then deep down into our hearts. And the truth is this: not everything is good, right? Not everything is good, but the truth is that in everything, even in bad things, even in things that we do not understand and that we do not like and that are so rotten sometimes that it's hard for us even to see or feel that God's around. The truth is that God's still there and that God still loves us and that God still cares and that God is still working. That in everything, God is working. That in everything, even the things that are not good, God is working toward our ultimate good. And that in everything, God's working to flip those bad things in our lives so that something good ends up coming out of it. It's going to take us several weeks to get through the story of Jacob and his kids to see that, but maybe that's okay that it takes several weeks because life isn't a tweet either, is it? It's a little complicated to get through. So let's get back into scene one of the story. Jacob continued to live in the land of Canaan where his father had lived. This is the account of Jacob and his descendants. Joseph was a 17-year-old young man. He took care of the flocks with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, his father's wives. Joseph told his father about the bad things his brothers were doing. Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because Joseph had been born in Israel's old age. So he made Joseph a special robe with long sleeves. Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them. They hated Joseph and couldn't speak to him on friendly terms. Joseph had a dream, and when he told his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Please listen to the dream I had. We were tying grain into bundles out in the field, and suddenly mine stood up. It remained standing, while your bundles gathered around my bundle and bowed down to it." Then his brothers asked him, "Are you going to be our king and rule us?" They hated him even more for his dreams and his words. Then he had another dream, and he told it to his brothers. "Listen," he said, "I had another dream. I saw the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowing down to me." When he told his father and his brothers, his father criticized him by asking, "What's this dream you had? Will your mother and I and your brothers come and bow down in front of you?" So his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept thinking about these things. Now, so far in Jacob's story, he hasn't mentioned much about like the age of people at those milestone moments. We don't know how old Jacob was exactly when he met God at Bethel and had that dream, or when he went back there. We got some round ideas, but here at the beginning, as it turns to his sons, we have this special marker that Joseph is 17. Wonder why he gets so specific there. Well, 17 meant what? He was a teenager. All right, a teenager. And teenagers aren't necessarily known for wisdom and discernment and clear thinking, are they? Some are, but some aren't necessarily known for that because they haven't lived long enough to get that kind of experience, the life experience that you need. So they don't always think things through. And sometimes they make hasty and rash decisions, which is kind of what we see Joseph doing here. I mean, how wise is it to tell your brothers in a very public manner, guys, you won't believe the dream that I just had. I mean, it's like, I know I'm like the second to last in the birth order here, but guys, one day this dream tells me that you're all going to be bowing down to me. And then he tells them a second time, guys, guess what? I had another dream. And even mom and dad were bowing down to me. How well do you think that goes over? I mean, can you picture this? Come here, Joseph. Let me tell you where you can stick that bundle that you're talking about as the 10 brothers just pile on, right? You can see that. Can you see that happening? Joseph doesn't. He's oblivious. He's oblivious to this, to the fact that he might be adding resentment to the resentment that they already felt as Joseph's tattling on his brothers and telling the things that he doesn't like about them. Joseph's he doesn't see that this could even cause problems, that he's just bragging more and more about what's going on. Joseph's thinking, oh, God's working? You bet! I mean, how else does son number 11 get to this spot? How is everything working out? Now, there's a different viewpoint in the story. Joseph's brothers, God is working. Ha! I mean, there's no way. And it all starts with this, verse 3 says, a special robe of long sleeves. Now, that special robe of long sleeves meant that Joseph was Dad's favorite, and everybody knows it. There is no subtlety at all here from dear old Dad. He has this robe ceremony, and what the robe ceremony means is that Dad is publicly saying, son number 11 in the pecking order, he gets the bulk of the inheritance. And son number 11 gets to be the boss of the family, when it's supposed to be son number 1. All right, and that was a very public turning history and custom on its heels, and it isn't said so, but reading between the lines, I'm just guessing that Joseph is wearing that special robe a lot. And he's wearing it in public. And he's walking around in front of his brothers, showing off who Dad thinks is number 1 and what he's going to become. No wonder, again, we read this, if that's what's going on. Verse 4, Joseph's brothers saw that their father loved him more than any of them. They hated Joseph and couldn't speak to him on friendly terms. And then after he tells them his dreams, verse 5, they hated him even more. Yeah, Joseph thinks God's working. Because how else is this coming out? Things are smiling down on me. The brothers are like, well, God's working? Why does this kid get what we deserve? And dad might even, clueless dad might be thinking, God's working? Why aren't my kids getting along? God was working. Right? That's the truth of that verse. God was working, and he was working for good, just not in ways that Joseph here or his brothers or even dear old dad understood. You see, everybody in this family needs to change. And everybody in this family needs to change a lot. There's dad. I mean, favoritism is not a great parenting practice. And it kind of messes up the family dynamics here. But Jacob's so excited that Rachel, the love of his life, the one that he worked 14 years for, finally has a child. And so he pours all of his love for her into this child. And at the root of that, even though he seems kind of clueless about what's going on, at the root of that might be pride. Not only pride in his special love of his wife, but also pride in, well, I'm the dad. I'm the boss. I'm the head of the family, and I can do whatever I want to do. Then there's the brothers. I mean, envy and jealousy and hatred, that's bad stuff too, especially when you just keep letting it foster and fester there. I mean, you're not happy at the situation, but to say nothing nice ever, to give a completely cold shoulder all the time and let your anger and envy grow and grow and grow, that's not good. And I think, again, at the root of that's probably pride. Pride in their position in the family that tradition said was owed to them. And then there's Joseph. I mean, prideful, arrogant, taunts his brothers with his dream. And yeah, he's a teenager, but still pride and arrogance here seem to run pretty deep. And Joseph's so full of himself, he just doesn't know when to be quiet. This is God's special family? I mean, what a mess. All of them are just messed up. Is God really working? Yeah. Just not in ways that we can see. See, God's going to work through events of the next several years, and most of those events are not going to be good. And some of those are going to be downright horrible. But he's going to work through those events to bring about change in their life that needs to happen. And to make sure that his promise to rescue all of the world through a descendant of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph, that's going to happen just like he said it would. But to do that, God's going to work through events that are coming up to get rid of all that misplaced pride in the family. You know, so we have a tendency to think that, well, pride's not all that bad. You don't like to be around braggarts or people who are, when you're telling a story, are always one-upping you with their story or talking about themselves all the time. But you think, well, it's not like pride's that bad or that dangerous, or so we think. That's actually what Satan wants us to think. And that's because pride ends up being the foundation of a whole lot of other problems, and in the end creates a whole lot of messes that could have been avoided. I mean, too bad that Joseph and his brothers and his father didn't think about what God says about pride, which is nothing good. Let me give you just a short list from Proverbs. Proverbs 8, verse 13. To fear the Lord is to hate evil. And this is God talking. I hate pride, arrogance, evil behavior, and twisted speech. It's not like, oh, I tolerate it, it's not so bad. God says, I hate pride and arrogance. Proverbs 11, verse 2, pride leads to disgrace, but with humility comes wisdom. Proverbs 13, verse 10, pride leads to conflict. Those who take advice are wise. Again, haven't you seen that in your own life? It's the pride and digging in, like is happening in this story, that leads to conflict. Proverbs 14, verse 3, a fool's mouth lashes out with pride, but the lips of the wise protect him. Proverbs 16, verse 5, everyone with a conceited heart is disgusting to the Lord. Certainly, such a person will not go unpunished. Are you getting the idea? Pride is not a good thing. And again, pride is not, humility isn't saying you think less of yourself. It's you think of yourself less and you think of other people more. It's putting your pride in the background. If you don't, here's some more words from Proverbs. Proverbs 16, verse 18, pride precedes a disaster, and an arrogant attitude precedes a fall. Yeah. Pride goes before a fall. And you see that again and again and again. Proverbs 18, before destruction, a person's heart is arrogant, but humility goes before honor. Proverbs 29, this is interesting, a person's pride will humiliate him. Proverbs 29:23, a person's pride will humiliate him, but a humble spirit gains honor. That's what God says. And that's truth, just as much now as then. So as you're thinking about that, where pride kind of worms its way in, maybe this week think about for yourself, where does pride have a potential to cause a problem for me? And what do those Bible verses tell me about what to do about it? I mean, if Dad or the brothers or Joseph had stopped to think about that issue that pride was creating, if they'd done what I'm asking myself to do this week and you to do this week, could it have turned out differently? I mean, what if instead of saying, I'm the dad and I'm going to do what I want in this family, Dad had stopped to think about and just watch and see how making Joseph the obvious favorite was bound to damage his relationship with his other kids. And it put his pride in the background. What if the brothers had been a little more patient, put their pride in the background, and been a little more patient with Joseph, and a little kind to him? And what if they'd spoken maybe to him things that were helpful? Maybe if they'd spoken the truth in a kind way and told him he was a little full of himself? Could things have maybe turned in a different direction? Might that have made Joseph less eager to flaunt his dreams? And how about Joseph? What if Joseph had learned when not to speak? When not to speak, when to hold his tongue, when to keep quiet? Could putting that pride in the background have had an opportunity to change the direction of the narrative? Except it didn't happen. No one changed. Not for a while, as we'll see. Stubborn pride through and through, and stubborn pride causes a fall. And sometimes a pretty nasty one, like we'll start to see in the next scene in the story next week. So what's the alternative? Well, as we go on in the story, we're going to see that in everything, even this cruddy stuff, God is still working. God's still working so that even when we're getting it wrong, God's wanting us to get it right. And God's also working so that our flaws, like our pride, don't end up being fatal. That's that verse Alex was reading for you before. While we're still sinners, while they're still messing up here, God is still working. And God is still working to draw them back to himself, and God's working to forgive our sins and to help us start fresh. God's working to use our mistakes to teach us something and to get us back on the right track. And along the way, God's also working to show us his deep patience with us and his own long suffering with us. But if we learn that lesson early, if we learn the lesson earlier in our story, things are likely to turn out a little better. We can learn things the hard way. But it's a lot easier if you just learn it what I'll call the Jesus way. Let me give you a couple of verses of what I'm talking about there. We read a few before. 1 Peter chapter 5. Clothe yourselves, all of you, with humility toward one another. For God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, under the mighty hand of God, so that at the proper time he may exalt you. It's not saying humble yourself so others can stomp you and crush you underfoot. It's saying humble yourself under the hand of God. And did you hear what it said? At the right time, God will exalt you. And then it goes on, casting your anxieties on him because he cares for you. I mean, one of our worries and fears might be that someone else is always going to get ahead, or they're going to push me behind, or they're going to stomp on me. And God's saying here, don't worry about that. I care for you. Let me take care of you. Humble yourself instead of pushing yourself forward and being prideful and arrogant. That leads to no good place. Trust me, cast that worries on me and trusting that I care for you. Or as Jesus says, Matthew chapter 11, beginning at verse 28, come to me, all who are tired from carrying heavy loads, and I will give you rest. Isn't it a heavy load to always have to try to push yourself ahead of somebody else, to always hold on to your pride at all costs? That's a heavy load to carry. Jesus said, it makes you tired. So what do? Come to me and I'll give you rest. Come to me and I'll give you rest as you confess. God, that pride was wrong. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. And he does. Place my yoke over your shoulders and learn from me because I, Jesus says, am gentle and humble. Then you will find rest for yourselves. Because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. That's the Jesus way. In everything, God is working. And he's working for our good. As we turn the pages in the story, we'll start to see how that works out.